The Catholic Church does not currently have a specific law making spiritual abuse a distinct crime in its code of canon law, but it is actively working to define and classify spiritual abuse as a canonical crime. For those of you who don't know, a canonical crime in Catholicism is an offense against the Church's canon law that can result in penalties like excommunication. These crimes are violations of the Code of Canon Law, which governs the Church's practices and the conduct of its members. Examples include heresy, apostasy, schism, physical violence against the Pope, getting an abortion, or violating the confessional seal. Spiritual abuse, of course, caught my eye because of the mission of my channel. So we'll be looking at all this today in light of religious trauma as we've defined it here. I've pulled a few articles that I'll link to in the description that will guide our discussion today and define our terms, and I'll react to these sources. For anyone new here, I'm H.G.Roberts, deconverted Christian after 25 years and author of On Monsters and Phantoms. And here we talk about religious trauma and how the Bible itself ties us up in knots. It leads to confusion, anxiety, fear, doubt, depression, emotional oblivion, mental paralysis, and ultimately, of course, trauma. I have a master's degree in mass communication, so I'm specifically interested in the messages that the Bible communicates to us today, the cognitive filters in our minds that we use to interpret those messages, and finally, the harmful impact those messages have on ourselves and our worldview. First, a disclaimer. I am not Catholic. I never was Catholic. I have not studied the history of Catholicism, nor how it administers its doctrine and law. I am not an expert in all things Catholicism, so perhaps I'm a bit out of my depth here. I'm no Trent Horn. Cut me a little slack, though. Unlike people like Trent, I've lived through 5 to 6 years of severe religious trauma in a conservative, evangelical, and fundamentalist brand of American Christianity, and I've committed years of my life to studying religious trauma to bring you scientific and empirically validated data about religious trauma along with rational Bible criticism. So despite my shortcomings around Catholicism, I am qualified to react to this latest development from the Vatican and to reveal the major problems with all this. So let's dive in. This article, titled Vatican Task Force Moves Forward on Defining Spiritual Abuse in Canon Law as Leadership Confirmed, published a little over a month ago, provides some background and definitions, as do others I'll present. We'll compare the Vatican's definition of spiritual abuse to our definition of religious trauma to see where they do or do not overlap. I think what I'll do is share excerpts from these articles first and my response to all this. And you've heard me say this before. We need religious trauma to have a seat at the table in these types of societal and policy discussions. So that's the framework in which I'm operating. To set this first excerpt up, the Vatican has commissioned a task force or a working group to define and investigate spiritual abuse. The task force, jointly overseen by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, or DDF, and the Dicastery for Legislative Text, was first established by Pope Francis in November 2024 to address what church jurists, or canon lawyers, have described as one of the most urgent legal gaps in canon law. The group's mandate is to determine how spiritual abuse, often linked to manipulation, coercion, and the misuse of authority within religious settings, should be formally classified as a canonical crime. Before I read more, you're going to hear references to the case surrounding Father Marko Rupnik, and for background, the case of Father Marko Rupnik involves a renowned Slovenian artist and former Jesuit priest accused of sexual, spiritual, and psychological abuse by more than 20 women over several decades. The case came to public light in 2022, by the way, and has been marked by allegations of institutional cover-up and procedural delays within the Catholic Church, leading to significant public outcry. A canonical trial is now pending in the Vatican as of the writing of this article. Victims allege he used his position of spiritual authority to manipulate and abuse women, with some claims dating back to the 1980s. Okay. Let's read some more from this article. The scandal surrounding Rupnik has been one of the most painful for the Church in recent memory, in part because it exposed how certain patterns of coercion and spiritual manipulation, though not explicitly defined in canon law, can devastate victims while remaining difficult to prosecute. The article goes on to say, currently, canon law does not clearly delineate spiritual abuse as a distinct offense. Instead, such behavior often falls into ambiguous categories, leaving investigators and tribunals with limited tools for accountability. The new working group aims to close that gap by identifying and codifying what constitutes spiritual abuse, its canonical penalties, and the forms of authority under which it can occur. We keep reading, and we see legal and theological experts have long pressed for such a reform. They argue that the Church must recognize not only physical or sexual violations, and we're all sadly too familiar with the Catholic Church's history there, but also the abuses of conscience and faith that can emerge in relationships of pastoral dependence, where obedience, trust, and spiritual direction can be weaponized. So keep all that in mind, and I'll read it again. The Church must recognize not only physical or sexual violations, but also the abuses of conscience and faith that can emerge in relationships of pastoral dependence, where obedience, trust, and spiritual direction can be weaponized. We'll come back to that as we close out. More from this article. If the working group completes its task before the conclusion of Rupnik's trial, the case could become the first in which the newly defined canonical crime is invoked. Such a development would mark a milestone in the Church's ongoing struggle to confront abuse in all its dimensions, physical, psychological, and now explicitly spiritual. Behind the technical legal language lies a deeper cultural shift. The Vatican's decision to systematize the concept of spiritual abuse signals a growing awareness that the Church's internal justice system must evolve to reflect the complexities of modern ecclesial life. For many, it represents the slow but tangible maturation of the Church's response to authority gone awry. As one canon lawyer in Rome observed, the challenge is not only to punish wrongdoing, but to protect what is sacred in the relationship between the faithful and their pastors. Defining spiritual abuse is a way of defending spiritual trust itself. I'm going to just stop and just leave this here in light of what I've just read. This is a video featuring two what I'd call public spokesmen for the Catholic faith, and quite popular in the online space around Christian and Catholic apologetics. Let's listen for a moment as Jimmy Akin and Trent Horn talk about active demonic activity.
Jimmy, what are your general thoughts on over-attributing things we observe to demonic forces?
Howdy, Trent. Very happy to be with you today. The basic answer is that we need to find balance on the question of demons, just like we need to find balance on every other question. Demons are real, and we don't want to minimize their activity in the world, but we also don't want to maximize it. We don't want to attribute more to them than they actually can claim credit for.
Let's just consider for a moment if what they present, which they believe is an accurate and truthful rendering of biblical scripture, amounts to spiritual abuse and would lead one to experience severe religious trauma. And let's again define religious trauma from the literature. The Global Center for Religious Research, or GCRR, says religious trauma results from an event, series of events, relationships, or circumstances within or connected to religious beliefs, practices, or structures that is experienced by an individual as overwhelming or disruptive and has long-lasting adverse effects on a person's physical, mental, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. The fear of demon possession and oppression, taught and validated through these Catholic pundits, Jimmy Akin and Trent Horn, is certainly a major source of religious trauma. Was anyone traumatized by The Exorcist? So, how else is this spiritual abuse? I linked to the full video below, by the way, When you press your agenda, when you defend your faith as valid and true, like Jimmy and Trent are doing here in this video, and I can show you a million more graphic videos around demon possession, this one is mild and educational, which I think can make it actually worse. When you desire for people to adhere to what you believe is the truth, and you support your agenda and claims with maintaining that there's active demonic influence in our lives, do you not think popular apologists like Jimmy and Trent are using coercive tactics like hell, heavenly reward, demonic activity, and protection from demonic activity insidiously and subversively against your mental health to manipulate you into believing their doctrine and accepting their faith, maybe out of fear, if nothing else? These guys believe they are right and justified in spewing this nonsense, and more than that, you will be eternally punished for not also believing it. Sounds pretty coercive to me. I know that I would have certainly responded to a presentation like this in fear and a feeling of, I had better get on board with Jesus lest I be manipulated and attacked by all these demons Jimmy and Trent proclaim are real. I want protection from these demons, and it seems that a relationship with Jesus Christ, maybe even a seat in the Catholic pews, is the only way to ensure that protection. That sounds like spiritual abuse to me from these two popular Catholic authority figures. The Catholic Church and the Vatican, the whole Christian machine, is no better, using hell and demon possession to manipulate people even if you think you're doing them a favor by leading them to salvation, itself an unproven figment of imagination, is spiritual abuse. We'll get into this more, but to set the table, Christianity itself, practiced in its various forms, is a source and vehicle for spiritual abuse, using claims of supernatural demon possession and coercive tactics like hell and eternal judgment or reward to press its interests when, of course, none of these claims can be defined consistently, agreed upon ecumenically, empirically validated or proven, nor tested and verified, nor falsified, though we can certainly get closer to proving it wrong by exposing things like fraudulent faith healings and demonic deliverance. Yes, I'm talking to you, Catherine Crick, and others like you. This article, Vatican to Study How to Address Spiritual Abuse in Church Law, from November 2024, which gives us more context around definitions, says, the doctrinal dicastery's norms for discerning and making judgments about alleged supernatural phenomena, which were published in May 2024, included a line saying, the use of purported supernatural experiences or recognized mystical elements as a means of or a pretext for exerting control over people or carrying out abuses is to be considered of particular moral gravity. Really? I mean, to me then, the Bible itself should be banned. Will the church hold itself to its own standards, or will it special plead its way out of culpability and into authoritarianism? I think we already know the answer to that. More from this article. The new note, published on the Doctrinal Office's website in late November, said that statement already allows for the misuse of spirituality to be evaluated as an aggravating circumstance if it occurs together with delicts or crimes such as sexual abuse. Alleged examples of the false mysticism in the dicastery's regulations include problems and behavior connected with the discipline of the faith, such as cases of pseudo-mysticism, alleged apparitions, visions, and messages attributed to supernatural origin, the note said. In this context, false mysticism refers to spiritual approaches that harm the harmony of the Catholic understanding of God and our relationship with the Lord, it continued. Currently, there is no delict, if I'm saying that right, in canon law classified by the name false mysticism, even though canonists occasionally use the expression in a manner that is closely tied to crimes of abuse. I'll provide some responses here soon. Let's take a look at our third article real quick. This one, titled Spiritual Abuse Occurs More Frequently Than Believed, Vatican official says, is dated August of 2021. Some quotes from that article. Spanish Archbishop Jose Rodriguez Carballo, secretary of the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life, said the most common motives for opening an investigation into inappropriate behavior are one or more of the following: problems with the Institute's assets being used for personal gain, abuse of power or spiritual abuse, including abuse of conscience, and problems related to affectivity. More from that article. Abuse refers to any psychological, physical, or sexual violence that takes place in a religious context or any manipulation that damages a person's relationship with God and with their own inner being, he said. When asked whether spiritual abuse was very common, the Archbishop said, "Such abuse, or the abuse of conscience, is usually more common than you might think." Pope Francis defines it as spiritual harassment, manipulation of consciences, brainwashing. This type of abuse usually occurs in the sphere of spiritual direction or within a community, especially when the internal forum, the individual's conscious and spiritual state, is not distinguished from the external one. Why do you suppose there's so much room for varied interpretations within this idea of false mysticism? How successful do you think we'll actually be in terms of defining what mysticism is, how it behaves, how it can be apprehended and understood, who regulates it, how it's weaponized, etc.? These are just some of the questions that I have, but let's go deeper. The problem is not that we have a God who's mysterious and all his ways are higher than ours. The problem is not that the spiritual realm is complex and poorly understood and we just need more time to unravel the mystery. It's that it's make-believe, at least as it is nebulously, loosely, and horribly defined by the Bible, and religious authorities empower themselves to define and apply this stuff as law. We're trying to nail Jello to the wall here, and the Vatican wants to be the hammer. Good luck. Okay, so I've given you some brief context, and there's more to learn about this topic. You can Google Vatican spiritual abuse if you want to look into this further. I am just scratching the surface here to draw your attention to this conversation. As we close out, let's weigh all of this against what we know about religious trauma. Based on how the Vatican has defined spiritual abuse, which we covered earlier, I think we see some overlap. The Vatican wants to outlaw forms of spiritual abuse like false mysticism, but I'd like to see better examples of what this actually means. Mysticism in general is already a vague or ill-defined religious or spiritual belief, especially as associated with a belief in occult forces or supernatural agencies. Someone explained to me how the mythological and superstitious spiritual teachings or practices found literally in the Bible and in Christian tradition, which we know empirically are at the root of religious trauma in terms of how they are weaponized for coercive control and manipulation, explain how they are not false mysticism. What is true mysticism? Is it mysticism that can be empirically provable and demonstrable, replicable, testable, and verifiable such that it can't be considered false? Are the supernatural claims in the Bible considered true mysticism? According to the Vatican and Christians, yeah, they are. But they don't meet the criteria we just listed. Yet not only are the supernatural claims in the Bible acceptable, but they're defended, taught, and practiced, and people are vilified for not accepting or practicing them, or in my case, ostracized. How is that not harmful? How is it not harmful and trauma-inducing to teach children about true mysticism like hell, demons, the devil, God's wrath, etc.? We already know it's harmful from the scholarly research. I have articles in my bibliography demonstrating how even spiritual imagery like the crucifixion and the Passover are trauma-inducing events. Just the thought of these things can create a measurable traumatic response in people that doesn't endear them to Christianity but terrifies them of it. I'm certainly happy that the Catholic Church is taking a step in this direction, but man, do we have a long way to go to really address the root of the problem, which, in my view, is the desire to protect core doctrines, rituals, institutions, hierarchies, and traditions that we know from the data harm. Not everyone, but many. And these dangerous doctrines, rituals, and traditions are indeed used to coerce and manipulate people into actions and compliance. They are used as weapons to subvert someone's identity and to undermine their values, rooted in their own moral subjectivity. Here's the problem with all this. I'm repeating myself to make the point. You have a religion, Christianity, based on unverifiable supernatural claims, including eternal conscious torment, the potential for loss of salvation, an imbuement with original sin that says we're all born evil and wicked, making people feel worthless, questionable claims of objective morality, and the potential for supernatural demonic possession that all lead to spiritual abuse and religious trauma. And I have all the scientific and scholarly evidence backing this up in a growing bibliography on my website. Yet the Vatican and Christian churches all over the world will not only protect that, but teach it as truth, enforce it, and excommunicate people for not believing in it, refusing to investigate itself while it comically tries to identify, define, and prosecute spiritual abuse. What a freaking joke. Hey, Vatican, maybe form a task force around how the Bible's disgusting claims, belief, and practices are the very things causing spiritual abuse, moral injury, and religious trauma. Take a look in the damn mirror and stop outsourcing this idea of spiritual abuse around people misusing your beliefs. Your beliefs themselves are harmful. Just teaching them, sustaining them, and protecting them is where the real harm is. It's misuse from the beginning. Start prosecuting that. Start listening to the millions of victims of religious trauma and realize that these cases aren't from some bad seed priest inflicting it, but rather the core doctrines and beliefs found right in the pages of your holy text as taught by you and other denominations. Maybe address the institution you've built to protect and sustain all this. Look, again, I'm glad the Vatican is at least looking into this idea of spiritual abuse. I hope that's the gateway drug into the much more damaging world of religious trauma. I don't see how you can accept the psychological effects from spiritual abuse, but not track that all the way back to the actual core doctrines found in the Bible. The harm is hiding in plain sight, but there's too much at stake to examine that, which is a shame. But that's why I'm here, and my channel exists, to point these things out. Help me out here, y'all. Raise these red flags. Plant them in the ground where you are. Let's end on Matthew 7:3-5. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Thanks for being here, everybody. If you want to support this channel, and I hope you do, please like, subscribe, share, comment, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss my next conversation starter. But a way to support the channel financially, since I don't have Patreons or sponsors, is to do what many others have done and purchase On Monsters and Phantoms. It is my memoir about severe religious trauma and deconversion from Christianity, and leave a review. It's a raw, an honest look into the diabolically harmful mind games Christianity plays with us. The link to it on Amazon is below. I appreciate that. If you do buy it, let me know via email in addition to a comment so I can publicly thank you in my next video. And by the way, if you're on the fence about whether or not to read my memoir, it's a tough read. Head over to onmonstersandphantoms.com. Right there on the homepage are lots of reader reviews. Hopefully others can help you know what to expect and how it can help. And yes, my family is still going through a medical crisis, as I've been talking about. We've got a few months of this ahead of us, so if you're able to donate to the GoFundMe page my friend Cody of the Peel the Onion channel set up, the link is in the description. And many of you have donated, and man, am I so thankful and grateful. We don't even know each other except through these videos and some comments we might have exchanged. But for so many of you to step up and help what amounts to a stranger, basically, that really shows me the power of this community. You guys are amazing, and your support means the world. So look for new videos each Wednesday and Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, where we take a deep dive into what religious trauma is, how it forms, and whom it's most likely to form, and what we can do about it if it does form. I'm going to try to get a new video out on Sunday, but I'm traveling to Vermont on business for several days, so that may not happen. If it doesn't, please support the channel and check out some videos you haven't watched yet. That goes a long way. And if you'd like me to cover a specific topic, let me know in the comments. This channel is for you guys, so let me know. And if you're new here and curious about religious trauma, or you think you may be suffering from it, First, welcome, and then explore the channel to see what other topics I've covered and what resources are available to you. And until next time, let's continue to catalyze a conversation together about religious trauma to let those who suffer from it know that there's hope, and to let those who dismiss it know that it's real.